Subscribe now, because, well, understanding how Vikings made wood last for centuries without chemicals really changes how you see every modern building around you. Across Scandinavia, wooden structures built more than 1,000 years ago still leave physical traces strong enough to study. Ships lifted from seabeds, church foundations buried in soil, and farm buildings exposed to brutal northern weather all tell the same story. Viking-age wood should have rotted away long ago, yet much of it endured. This was not because Vikings had secret substances or mystical knowledge. It was because they understood wood as a living material that continues to react to water, air, and microorganisms long after a tree is cut. Modern builders try to overpower nature with chemicals. Vikings worked with natural forces instead, and that choice is why their wood survived. Vikings began preservation before the tree ever touched an axe. The first step in Viking wood longevity was timing. Trees were cut almost exclusively during winter dormancy. At this stage, SAP content was low, sugars were minimal, and internal moisture was reduced. These conditions made the wood far less attractive to insects and decay fungi. Archaeological evidence from tool marks and pollen analysis confirms consistent winter felling across Viking settlements. After cutting, logs were not immediately shaped or assembled. They were stored whole, often with the bark still intact, and allowed to season slowly. This process could actually take years. Slow air drying preserved the natural resins and prevented internal cracking. In modern terms, this explains why fast kiln-dried lumber often fails outdoors. For anyone building sheds, cabins or tools today, selecting winter-cut air-dried wood dramatically improves durability, and that's without adding any treatment at all. Charring wood was a deliberate defensive strategy, not decoration. One of the most effective Viking techniques was surface charring. Structural posts, ship planks, and ground contact timbers were lightly burned before use. This controlled scorching carbonized the outer layer of wood, sealing pores and killing surface organisms without weakening the internal structure. The charred surface repelled insects and slowed water absorption. This technique still works today. Charring fence posts, raised bed frames, or, cabin siding before installation creates a natural protective layer that outperforms many modern treatments. The Vikings understood that decay begins at the surface, and they neutralized that threat before it could take hold. Viking pine tar was produced slowly in earth kilns and applied warm so it could penetrate deep into the wood. Unlike modern paints or sealants, tar did not harden into a brittle shell. It remained flexible, moving with the wood as humidity and temperature changed. This prevented cracking and moisture entrapment, which are, two of the main causes of rot today. Ships were retarred regularly, not because tar failed, but because Vikings understood maintenance as part of preservation. Applying natural tar to outdoor wood today, especially in wet or coastal environments, creates long-term protection without poisoning soil or water. Perhaps, the most important Viking principle was moisture control. Vikings accepted that wood would get wet. Instead of trying to seal it completely, They designed structures so water could drain and evaporate quickly. Buildings were elevated, posts were set on stone, and ship planks overlapped in ways that allowed swelling without splitting. Rot requires moisture and oxygen. Vikings often removed one of those conditions. Wood was either allowed to dry fully through airflow or kept submerged in low oxygen environments. This explains why shipwrecks preserved in mud or peat survive for such a long time. For modern builders, this principle, translates into ventilation, drainage, and avoiding trapped moisture at all costs. Where metal was necessary, Vikings minimized its damage to wood. Wooden pegs were often preferred over iron nails, especially in wet areas. Rust actually expands as it forms, and in doing so, it splits wood fibres from the inside. Viking joinery, interestingly enough, allowed movement without tearing the grain apart. Modern builders, they can apply this by using wooden dowels, stainless fasteners, or joinery techniques that allow wood to expand and contract naturally. Longevity comes from flexibility, not rigidity. Viking ships flexed in waves. Houses shifted slightly with frost and thaw. This movement prevented stress fractures that invite decay. Modern construction often locks wood into rigid systems that crack under pressure. For survivalists and homesteaders, designing structures that tolerate movement increases lifespan dramatically. Floating floors, flexible joints, and layered assemblies all, follow Viking logic. Vikings accepted maintenance as part of permanence, really. There was no belief that a structure should be built once and forgotten. Wood was inspected, retarred, repaired, and sometimes, replaced in sections. This approach prevented small problems from becoming total failures. It also allowed buildings to outlive their builders. In practical application, this means scheduling regular inspections and simple maintenance instead of relying on chemical treatments to do all the work. Longevity comes from attention, not additives. Viking wood preservation worked because it followed natural law, not industrial shortcuts. Every Viking method respected how wood behaves over time. They slowed decay instead of trying to stop it entirely. They guided moisture instead of trapping it. They maintained instead of replacing. This system required knowledge, patience, and discipline, but it produced results modern chemistry still struggles to match. Understanding these principles allows modern builders to reduce reliance on toxic treatments, save money over time, and create structures that age gracefully instead of failing suddenly. Subscribe again before you leave, because the past still holds the strongest survival lessons. If this deep breakdown helped you see Viking engineering as practical, usable knowledge rather than myth, subscribe to Past to Live for more historically grounded guides that translate ancient methods into modern resilience. Share this episode with builders, homesteaders, and anyone serious about creating things meant to last longer than a lifetime.